has been laced with chemicals. What can be done with this water, and what guarantees are there that documented reports about dumping it in streams, on roads, and other locations will not occur in our watershed, as has happened in Pennsylvania?
Well, certainly that first part of your statement's not true. Frac fluid, flowback water, there's nothing unusual that cannot be taken out of that to return it to drinking water standards, if that is the standard. If New York decides that they want that as their standard, it is technologically feasible to do that. No question about it. Marcellus, other than the naturally occurring radioactive material in it, the chemistry of the brine is actually almost identical to other brines that we're producing now in this state for years than the Oriskany, for instance. Oriskany has higher levels of iron, barium, total dissolved solids. We can treat any of those to drinking water standards if that is the standard that New York adopts. They've taken a slightly different approach and decided that they want to go with the Speedies route, which does allow for treating that water to specified levels that are deemed to be safe levels by the DEC and the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. Different theories on what level you need to take that water. The reality is, though, that very little of that water will be treated that way and released into the environment. Tony is talking about statistics on how much is being recycled. It is true that if you look at historically, we're not at 90%, but 90% is where we are rapidly approaching. The EPA has just conducted a survey of the operators. Most of them are between 90 and 99% recycling on site. And the reason they can do that really is because the water that comes back, 90% of the water that comes back in the first few months. It's fairly fresh compared to the brines that you're hearing about. And so they're actually able to take it. Hasn't been in contact with the formation very long. It's the water that is in the fracture system that is coming back quickly. It comes back quickly. It's a very small amount of filtration process is applied to it, and it's simply taken to the next well and used on the next well, often on the same pad.
Thank you.
Again, I agree with Scott that we have the technological wherewithal to treat flowback water, produced water brine, so that we can get drinkable water out of that. That does not mean that the wastes that are filtered out suddenly disappear. So to the extent that this stuff is recycled, either on-site or off-site, you still have both solid and liquid waste that have to be transported someplace else, typically West Virginia, to a lesser extent Ohio, which means they're still trucked, which means there's still risk of trucking accidents and spills. But I'm going to repeat the point I made at the end of my talk. I would like to see recycling and/or reuse be regulatorily required to the highest extent technically possible, regardless of cost.